like to introduce our final speaker, but we're going to have a summary by Selma at the end. But I'd like to introduce Dr. Revi Stirling, Director of USAID's Women Connect Challenge. And Revi brings many years of experience to work from her work to help close the gender divide with a focus on digital solutions. She's joining us from the middle of her night. So welcome, Revi, and we're so glad you could join us. And I'll just stop sharing, and if you could load your presentation, that would be great.
Absolutely. We've only been doing this for 2 years, right? So I can figure out how to share a screen.
And you're a
Oh my
digital
goodness.
person too, so we're expecting high.
Sometimes. Let's see. Let me make sure I get this up and going.
So while
Everybody,
everyone's
this
doing
has
that,
been so fascinating. I just, I didn't know really what to expect since I'm not an agriculture person, but I'm blown away by how many commonalities there are with all of our work. And as the first woman said from CGIAR, it really takes that combination of gender people and the technical people to do this kind of work. So it's fascinating. Now, are you able to see my slides?
yep, we are
Oh, yay.
definitely.
Okay, good. Now I just have to figure out how to minimize myself a bit. I'll keep myself up a bit, but wonderful. So anyhow, Allison, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. My name is Revi Stirling, and I met Allison a few months ago. We were talking about really this hype of the digital apps, right? And how everything in the development industry keeps moving towards digital, and who is being left behind and how we design specifically for women, especially women in agriculture. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of my journey in this space. I've been doing work in digital inclusion for a little over 20 years, first at Microsoft Research and out of the Bangalore, their India labs, then as a professor at the University of Colorado. And then the last 6 years, I've been running gender technology and development programs for USAID through a variety of mechanisms. This one is through DAI. But to start with, to me, there's no greater force, there's no greater two forces for change than women and technology. That's my take on it. That's been my experience. I think, we all know that women are the key to sustainable long-term change and development in their communities. They're in charge of, as we've seen today, the budgets, the education, the health of the household. At the same time, we have technology that's enabling us to scale and sustain projects like never before. And this should be a no-brainer. We should be doing this force multiplier of women in technology just everywhere all the time, as some people have even alluded to their amazing programs. I've been taking a ton of notes, so I hope people don't mind when I follow up with you on the panel. The problem is digital technology keeps failing women, which means technologists keep failing women. It's not the problem of the technology. It's the fact that people are gender blind in the tech space. We have this discourse that technology is gender blind, as our second speaker talked about, and then women get forgotten. And I have faced this for 25 years of trying to get people to understand the gender differences when it comes to tools and technology and information services. But at the end of the day, if women are still excluded from the benefits of technology because of all sorts of reasons that are very it's just part of being female, as we'll talk about. Just the gender discourses, the power dynamics, the gender dynamics in communities. If we keep marginalizing women, we're never going to have equitable development when it comes to tools and technologies. And so this idea of digital divides and digital disconnects really has motivated me for quite a long time to figure out how do we appropriately and sustainably and equitably bring women online. Because what I see again and again, like many of you always see, it's the men that are the early adopters. It's the men that have the smartphones. Different studies have shown that 30% of smartphones that are given to women are reappropriated or sold by family members right off the bat. So even on these programs where there's phone giveaways and subsidized phones and airtime, it's not like women are necessarily the direct beneficiaries of those. I work in a lot of programs. what I really love to do is work in communities where women have been entirely excluded from using technology, either by local decrees, having people that say, community leaders and religious leaders that say things like the internet is immoral and thus you cannot be on it. And so what really I've been focusing on is the fact that there are millions of women, of course, we see poor women with phones all over the place. We always see all the pictures of, women and girls with phones, they're doing everything else, but there's close to 1 billion women who have never used a phone. We know that half the population of the world has never used the internet. So obviously current efforts are failing. And I wrote about this last year on why women aren't using your agriculture app. And it was a blog that I wrote just in pure frustration of the fact that USAID and other donor communities kept pushing these challenges that were based on smartphones, based on constant connectivity, et cetera. And the fact is, digital empowerment does not necessarily mean you have to be connected. I look at something like the Amplio talking book right here in this picture, which has been deployed in many agricultural settings around the world for places that are off the cellular and electrical grid, or where the cost of data connectivity is far too high, or where the communities speak 100% oral only languages that aren't even represented on the internet. So there are a lot of technologies out there that are probably more appropriate to low resource, low literacy, low agency populations, but we keep getting stuck on this model of the smartphone, the app, et cetera. And I really feel like it's my mission to go around and widen people's perspectives to say that's not always the best case. And we've known probably since, the first writings on the gender digital divide in kind of 1997, 1998 from people like Nancy Hafkin and Sophia Heyer and other people that are probably very familiar to the gender people on this. We've known what these issues are about the gender digital divide from the very beginning. In fact, they were predicted and they've come true again and again. It's this tautological system where all the barriers are usually listed, right? It's cost, it's literacy, it's mobility, it's perceived relevance. And a lot of organizations focus very specifically on those things. It's easy to address cost. You just subsidize the phone. It's easy to do digital literacy, they think, but it's actually not, because so many of the digital literacy programs are just not even appropriate for the communities that would use them. All of these come down to what I think is the root cause are these social norms. And that's been talked about quite a bit in this program in different ways. When we talk about culture and society, different panelists have been bringing this up. So for me, most of this list are symptoms of social norm inequities. And this is somehow new to technologists. In fact, recently I'm getting so much more interested in this. Tell me about these social norms. And I'm thinking, my goodness, gender and development organizations have been focused on this for many decades, and the technologists are quite late to the game. That really prompted me when I was at the university to write a concept note that USAID decided to engage with me on and bring me out to DC, called the Women Connect Challenge. And it really focused on getting to the root of those social norms and understanding under what conditions could women ever use technology in certain places where patriarchal societies prohibited them from, where the cost was always going to be too extreme to bear, or in places where there simply wasn't going to be any connectivity coverage because mobile network operators saw no commercial value to being out in those places. And it started off with round one. Now we're on 5 rounds with different partners. So it has kind of taken off a life of its own, but it's been such an amazing experience to work mostly with smaller community-based organizations. And that's another thing I've been really pushing for, even though some of the organizations on here are familiar to all of us. Some are quite small and community-based. And that's something I really want to keep promoting within the team that I work with in USAID and DAI is stop working with the big folks, work with the people on the ground that really know those gender considerations. As part of the RFA, it was a requirement to really talk about, how do you know the gender dynamics in these communities? How can you explain to me how you know them? Because it's not about the technology, it's about the people. And it really comes down to, none of these are new to probably anybody, but they keep going back to things that we've talked about throughout this workshop. It's confidence, it's changing social norms, it's creating the economic opportunities, it's having that community support network. And one that's really important to me, and it really drives my career, is creating technologies that women want and they want to use, and they're able to use. And what does that actually mean? Does that mean that it has to be a text-free user interface for low literacy populations? Does it mean that they need to have their husband's approval when they go and search on things, that he needs to be part of the equation and mirror the screen to see what he's doing, et cetera? So a lot of it means working directly with women, but also much more the gatekeepers against women's economic information empowerment, to help them understand that there are the economic and then the community benefits of women being online. And I think this is really, germane in the agriculture space, because obviously there's such a push for digital applications. And the last 3 weeks I've been in Uganda, where I've probably interviewed 600 rural women, and none of them have used a digital development application besides WhatsApp. So, part of me has to report that back and say, you're putting all this money, especially in places like the Rift Valley and in Kenya and Uganda, into agriculture applications that no one is using, especially not women. So let's get to the root of why we have, again, this disconnect of technology not serving the women that it really needs to. So I'm going to briefly talk about these 5 proven strategies and projects that I want to highlight, in case there's anything from them that you can glean and apply in your projects. And do stay in touch with me afterwards. I love talking about this. I'd love to brainstorm with you on what might work in your organization or in certain community contexts. For changing social norms, I want to talk about a project in northern Nigeria where local clerics had banned women's internet use. And what we did with this was we did a whole family training for 16 weeks. So husbands, their wives, their children, they all came to a training center so that husbands could really understand what this internet thing was and how it could be beneficial to the family. And there were workshops that took them through the risks, how to mitigate the risks, the benefits. And then there was also an accompanying program with these clerics and other scholars and gender experts in the area, where there was a debate about the role of technology in the families. And this went on for about 1.5 years and reached an audience of over 9 million people. So you had the very micro level intervention, and you had this kind of macro level debate at the same time. And it's interesting that 5% of husbands said they would let their wives use the internet and have a phone at the beginning of the training, and at the end 95% did. Another one is something we've been doing in India with several projects, has been looking at understanding what creating economic opportunities look like, because the fact is that just because you have an internet connection doesn't mean you're going to have a thriving internet commerce storefront on Etsy or Amazon, things like that, because the trades, the tariffs, the logistics are just beyond the reach and capacity of a lot of communities. Also, what I found in working in northern Bihar with several of our organizations, were so many women that couldn't leave their house. They could perhaps go out to a field to work, they could work in their home garden, but for all sorts of cultural and social reasons, they literally had an incredibly isolated life. So what are the opportunities there? And in here, we were working with them to understand what kind of government schemes were available, what they could do training-wise in their home if materials were brought to them, and to also lower the total cost of ownership of phone and information access by offering offline clouds and offline content, so that we could make sure that people aren't paying an additional tax just to connect to services that the rest of us take for granted, and also to have knowledge that the rest of us learned in school. So if you can't leave your house, how do you learn? And learning shouldn't necessarily be that expense thing that makes the difference between, yes, I'm going to do this, and no, I'm not. One of the things we keep running into, and it's come up a few times in this workshop, has been women's confidence and how important that is. I talk to women all the time who say, I'm too dumb to use my phone. And I'm like, wait a minute, you raise all of these crops, you raise kids, you've gotten through COVID. Yes, you're smart enough to use a smartphone, or you're smart enough to use the internet. But they say things like, my phone speaks a different language than me because it's a hand-me-down phone from somebody that migrated from another area, etc. So with Miyamo, we used their 321 service to create in Tanzania and Pakistan a service where people could call in and just understand, what is this internet thing? What is a social network? What's in it for me? What are the risks? How can I even get started? How do I, know if my phone can do this? And it was almost pre-digital literacy training so that women could have the options, because there are so many digital interventions that come through. And so many women just say, that's not for me. And this way it gave them at least a starting point to say, maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't. And in the first 6 months of that trial, we had over 250,000 women from Tanzania call in and get information about just what does it mean to be digital. This is one of my favorite projects. This is working with women's collectives in Bamako, Mali, in 5 slums. And what they really wanted was health and market information. And they all speak Bambara. 97% of them were illiterate. There's not a lot of Bambara content online. So we worked with them to understand what they liked from WhatsApp, what they liked from Facebook, different things that we showed them that they weren't necessarily familiar with, because the smartphones, maybe there's, one per VSLA or one per women's group. It's a shared commodity. These things are not in people's hands individually. So we did workshops to understand what really designing with end users meant. It's one of the digital development principles, but it's one of those things that's really hard to do because it takes time and it takes patience and it takes understanding cultural nuances that are going to be lost to me forever as an outsider, but finding internal, sociologists and anthropologists in the country that could really help translate these things, that we came up with, a visual and voice-based social network that worked entirely offline in a system of message exchanges. And then this network really took off during COVID time. And the women have just really loved it. And we've been able to find them some other donors for phones. And especially in COVID, they've been able to use it to make sure they had accurate information. They could find out where vaccines were, school closures, et cetera. And then my last example with community support, this is an agricultural region in Morocco, in Midelt. It's their Morocco's largest apple producing region, but it was completely off the mobile network operator landscape. Cost for data was just too high, and thus there was no internet. People were obviously at the whims of middlemen who had better technology and services and access to market information. So the community women got together with women from 4 other countries through a program called an organization called AFCHICS out of Nairobi, and they learned how to deploy their own ISP, their own internet service provider, services as a community network to the community. And what was fabulous is not only were these women bringing in internet and rural electrification for the first time, because obviously you need the power to run a community network, there was almost no backlash from men because they were just so delighted to have the information. So if you do this thoughtfully, if you understand the social norms, if you understand the trade-offs, if you're working with mostly the gatekeepers to understand under what conditions this could work, this is where I think we have the biggest chance in changing the social norms around technology use. And that's going to be more and more critical because, as we know, donors and partners love this digital space, and it's hard for them to understand that not all women have smartphones and tablets and all the time in the world to train and use these things. So we can work on that end in helping to educate the donors and the partners, but at the same time, we can help women in communities really ready themselves to understand what the benefit of digital is. And then it's really their choice if they want to participate or not. And to me, that's really the essence of development. So there are a few resources I'm putting up here from USAID that my team and I have worked on over the last few years. But I would really just love to stay in touch. Questions you have, ideas you have, technologies. I mean, I really feel like I've got in my brain about 23 years of failures and successes in this space. So thank you so much for giving me an education in IPM and understanding that this is an area in ag tech that I need to look at and be more aware of myself. So I'll stop now and turn it back over to Allison and see if anybody had any comments. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Revi. And actually, there's lots of comments coming
through.
No.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. No, don't say, oh, no. Oh, yes, that's great.
Okay.
And I've got a question here from, I think it's from Yvonne. She was wondering why women use WhatsApp but not other apps.
I think it's just, when I talk to them, the usability of it is so easy and they feel like they trust it. It's just, it seems very like, a communal technology that for some reason they trust more than Facebook. They don't feel like they get scammed as often on it. They don't feel like they've been harassed on it as much, although people do say, yes, I do get strange calls, etc. But for some reason, WhatsApp has just taken off. And it's interesting because I know of a lot of people that are writing, they're looking into why this is the case, because now we can't ignore it. It's not a fad. So I think more and more research will come out of that from the science, technology, and society world. But I really think that vendors that have been very focused on having their own applications as a standalone on phones are realizing they need to package it with WhatsApp. So I'm watching like Demagi and CARE and CellEd and other NGOs and commercial, education platforms say, oh my gosh, this is sticking around. We're going to move our app to a WhatsApp platform. So for some reason, it just seems to be the hot commodity right now. Yes.
And here's a question from Bethel. She just wants to know, is there material you can share about the design creative tech for women in, I think it's Mali. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I'd absolutely love to. Yep. Let me follow up directly. I have data sheets on all of these projects, and obviously I was only able to give a few minutes of it, but I'm also happy to connect people with the orgs that are doing this work. Absolutely.
Okay.
And yes, WhatsApp does belong to Facebook. Yes, it's interesting, but no one else seems to really know that. And now we have to call it Meta. Right now we live in the metaverse.
That's true. Tell me, here's a question. I mean, you just talked about some of the lessons, I guess. I mean, you've had some failures. I think I heard the failure in your sentence before. What are some of the a practical tip, some of the sort of key things that you've learned around successfully reaching out to women, or ways to encourage them to participate in your projects?
Well, I think that, there's the biggest thing has been around, looking at the cultural norms and social norms and trying to understand what even makes sense for women in these contexts. What are their, how do the social norms line up against what their priorities and ambitions and aspirations are, and then trying to find that sweet spot, because there's obviously a set of rules in which people have to behave in a certain society. That there's lots of villages across northern India that have banned mobile cell phone use for women, and here's the world's largest democracy. So what do you do with the local context, and what do you do with women's aspirations? And you try to find that place in the middle where both can be served to a degree until people realize that, wow, this isn't that unsafe. Wow, the internet is just a tool like anything else. It can be used for bad. It can be used for good. Unfortunately, when it's used for bad against women, it can be incredibly detrimental, right? I mean, we've seen honor killings over the use of, phones. We see the harassment online of women. We see the pornography, etc. So it really can be a minefield, but I think that's really where it comes in, with really thoughtful partners. And maybe you do it in a safer group setting as opposed to individuals, where you're working with, village savings and loans and women's self-help groups and agriculture collectives to say, hey, we're going to use it first and foremost for this. And then let's see if it makes sense in an educational setting or a women's health setting or those kind of things. But yeah.
And and I guess just closing, what are some of the sort of challenges for you the hardest challenges for you when you're developing these projects? I guess, what are some of the barriers that you find are really?
I think the hardest thing is for me to get out of the way. And, because I have lots of ideas, I've seen lots of projects, but at the end of the day, if this isn't useful and interesting and fits the preferences and the needs of the women we're trying to serve, it's completely pointless. So yes, I can have a million ideas for apps and services, but what's really important is to go and try to understand the digital ecosystem in communities and listen. I mean, we know that, we've heard that again through this workshop, but women know what they want. They know their threshold for risk. They know what their husbands and mother-in-laws and employers will say. And so they are the trove of information. And what I need to do and try to help other technologists understand is that has to drive the design process. I can sit here and be like, oh, we could use blockchain for this. Well, if the world burns up in climate change, blockchain isn't going to be very useful. So, we need to be, technologists need to be more relevant, and we need to be much better listeners, especially to development domains like agriculture and the expertise of gender and development organizations. Us technologists like to think we have the answers to everything. And in fact, no, we just seem to, we're just nerds. We're just nerds that have good hearts, but we just really need to listen a lot more.
Excellent. That's an excellent, I think, summary actually, and really virtually a good launch pad to our last speaker. But Revi, that was a really, I think, pertinent piece of information to take on board around that importance of actually listening to women and actually understanding what works for them, because they know around what they can adapt to and adopt, and they're the ones that should be leading this from their perspective. So it's great to have people like you supporting that process, and thank you so much for joining us. It's really a big thing to join us in the middle of your night, and we really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, anytime. Anytime. Yep. I got to learn so much. I'm